Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's training entitled Community Building Beyond the Pandemic. I'm really excited to be with you all tonight, and especially excited to be leading this training with Antonio from Jolt. Um, I'm Siobhan Steuben. I am currently the Texas NAACP Youth and College Division President. I'm also the president for the Baylor University chapter. I'm born and raised in San Francisco, so I'm not originally from Texas, but that is my new residence. I'm really excited to be in Texas. I've been in Texas for the last 4 years. I'm actually now, as of today, a Baylor alumna. So shout out to all of the 2020 graduates. I'm really proud of you all just for making it. I know it's really hard to not have a graduation. I can definitely relate, but just know I'm really proud of you. A lot of people are really proud of you. Like I said, I'm originally from San Francisco, so being in Texas is definitely a lot different. But I've enjoyed being in this space, and it's definitely exposed me to a lot within NAACP. Um, we're going to dive in to a lot of different things, but we want to talk a lot about community building. And so I'm going to pass it over to my partner for tonight, Antonio, and he is the executive director for Jolt, which is the largest progressive Latino organization in Texas. And so he's a human rights advocate, and he's been recognized and featured in many news postings. So Washington Post, HuffPost, and USA Today. So I'm going to pass it to him so he can tell you a little bit more about himself and Jolt.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. It's a great honor to be here with you. And like you mentioned, congratulations to all the students that are joining us today. I know that you're working hard in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, and your resilience is truly inspiring. As Siobhan noted, I'm the interim executive director of Jolt. Jolt is the largest Latino civic engagement organization in the state of Texas. We have the privilege of being operating out of Austin, Dallas, and Houston, and currently at over almost 30 student chapters across college campuses and universities all over the state. We focus on building power for communities of color. We care deeply about full equity, making sure that everybody in the state is represented equally and has the resources that they need to truly thrive. At Jolt, we do our work through a cultural lens. We want to make sure that we emphasize the importance of art and culture and our heritage, be proud of who we are and where we come from. And we try to make sure that we convey that message through all of our campaigns. We're so happy to be collaborating with the NAACP, a relationship that has been, that we've been harnessing now for a couple of years. And so proud to be walking side by side with the giants at the NAACP who have led work on behalf of our communities for so many decades. It's really a privilege to be on this call today and to be discussing how do we continue to build coalitions, partnerships beyond the pandemic.
Cool. Thank you so much, Antonio. Before we get into our next part, we'd love to hear from you all. Where are you tuning in from? What chapter are you representing? Your region, your state? So go ahead and drop that in the chat, just so that we know you're alive and well and tuning in tonight. So this first portion, we want to talk a little bit about modern emancipation. Someone said on one of the last panels that I listened to from Host About Youth and College Vision that we don't want to go back to normal. And I would agree. Going back to normal in regards to going outside, yeah, that's great. I would love to go back outside. I think being in the house for the last 2 months has been a little tiresome. But in terms of going back to normal and having less of the freedom and emancipation that we've been experiencing during the entire history of this country, that's not what I want to go back to. So we want to talk more about moving beyond that space, what that progress can look like. And so that's where this term modern emancipation that Antonio and I have talked about and are trying to filter through in Texas. So something I stress to my team in Texas is that we want to ideate and develop plans now so that when our society is higher functioning, and by that I mean being able to what we're calling go outside and be on the ground physically, that we actually have plans to develop and implement, and that we're not trying to work and catch up with time, but that we're working in tangent with what we're being given. So at this point, we want to make sure that we're connecting now to create a better future. So that's why Text NAACP and Jolt do have this really great connection and this partnership that we forged, because we want to make sure that our future looks better than what our normal did before we were quarantined inside the house. So a big part of our partnership with Jolt is that it unifies two communities. It unifies the Black community, and it unifies the Brown community. And so sometimes the people that you're working with may not look exactly like you, but they understand and are fighting for the same things. And so we want to move beyond the conversation. We want to learn, how do we take the conversations that we're seeing on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, or even in our house, and how do we put those into action? And how do we bring all those people into one space and create a movement? So when you think about it, and we were talking about this a little bit before the call, like you think about our history and what life looked like before, you may think it looks way better than what our ancestry did, but it doesn't mean it can't look even better. And so our society right now doesn't model what many of us would consider to be equity and equality and freedom. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be fighting for more and demanding more, but it also doesn't mean you have to do it alone. And so that's what building a partnership looks like.
Absolutely. I echo everything you say, Siobhan. And, on this notion of modern emancipation, individually we are powerful, but together we are unstoppable. And I truly believe that when Black and Brown coalitions are solidified and perpetuated forward, we have the potential to not just transform Texas, but to transform the United States of America. And we were talking about how currently this new digital generation has the capacity within their fingertips through social media and other digital platforms to really galvanize the attention of the nation and begin to bring about transformative change that was sparked by movements so long before us. And we really recognize that in this moment, it's on us. You may be sitting there on a Friday evening thinking about how cumbersome it is to be stuck inside and due to this unprecedented pandemic. But I think that what we are trying to touch on here is that it presents an opportunity to prepare to build a brighter future. How do we begin to identify the coalitions that need to be forged, the partnerships that need to be created to make sure that we are brainstorming and identifying problem solving together to move forward our bold and ambitious agendas of full racial equity, full economic equity in this country? How do we begin to prioritize the voices of Brown and Black leaders across our nation? How do we begin to put those voices front and center and bring them into the decision-making tables? For so long, our communities have been under-resourced, underrepresented, taken for granted. And we know that operating in the normal doesn't work for us. So going back to business as usual is not something that we want to do post-COVID, because going back to business as usual means we're continuing to be discriminated, continuing to be dehumanized, and that's just no longer a future that the youth of this country deserves. And so in this moment of coronavirus and pandemic and shelter in place, we have a real opportunity, a potential to create multicultural power building coalitions like the NAACP and Jolt to bring about just that change that we seek. And it's imperative that in this moment, you're not sitting idly by waiting for the next leader to come in and show you the way, but that we start looking internally towards us and towards our own communities and stepping up and filling that void.
And what I also want to say in terms of that before we move on to the next thing is that all of this that we're saying tonight, it definitely can be applied in different areas. So it can be applied to your unit, to your branch, to your state conference. Partnerships are universal. And so I hope that you all consider in terms of where you are, what positions you're in, what your unit looks like, that this partnership, or even it can be with your neighbor, it can be on a personal level as well, but building partnerships is not just one-sided. It's not just one shape or form. And so this information can be applicable in multiple areas.
Absolutely.
So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say absolutely. And with that in mind, Siobhan and I have developed this model for power building. We're gonna go deep. We're gonna do a deep dive into each one of these categories, but we think that these are essentially the pillars of what it means and what we need to do to create those coalitions.
Okay. So our first one we say is mission alignment. And the second is identifying transformative projects. And the third being leveraging each other's existing network. So we're going to go into what we mean by mission alignment. And so that looks like, so we have three common questions that we think will help start off what it means to have a mission alignment. So it's, do we share common interests? So in Texas NAACP and Joel's case, yes, we do. Our interest is advocacy, it is civil rights, it is a lot around voting initiative and voter rights. And then second, do we prioritize communities of color? Most certainly. Obviously, Joel is an organization that is working with Latinos and young Latinos to promote progressive politics. And then obviously NAACP is the National Association of Colored People. So I think that speaks for itself. And then do we mutually advocate for full equity? And so definitely there is no question. Even in the mission of NAACP, we cover so many things. And if you encompass those, it is most definitely just to be fully equitable in this society, to have all the rights that everyone else does, to have the same privileges that everyone else does. So when you're thinking about mission fit, it's a lot simpler than it may sound. You may think a lot into it. Do we have the exact same idea? We may not know the exact route to get there. We may not have the same exact path or plan for how organizations would derive, but do you have an idea for what those actions should look like, what the outcome should look like? And that's really what mission alignment looks like.
Absolutely. And if I may just add, you're probably already brainstorming, thinking about like who's on my campus or who's in my community who we share mission alignment items with. And I encourage you to seek those different organizations out, seek those different collaborations out, do a quick search online and find out who are the movers and shakers in your community and how they're contributing to moving along these type of initiatives. And we'll talk on, connecting with them in a little bit. But initially, you want to identify who are the like-minded bodies in your community that are already doing work, and you want to make sure that you're partnering with folks that have a reputation for prioritizing full equity of our communities, that have a passion and a drive for representation that does not limit or exclude folks, but brings people into the fold. If we want to create a multi-generational, multicultural coalition that really speaks to all of the issues that our communities mutually face, we're going to have to make sure that we do the due diligence and the research into identifying which are the key components of those elements. In our digital generation, we are often connected online, but seldomly do we really reach out and extend our hand in person and in public. And right now, given the circumstances, of course, that's a little bit challenging, but this whole seminar is about post-COVID, right? And so when our future does permit us to be able to make those lasting relationships, those deep connections, it's crucial, not just for coalition building, but for you and your career in general, making sure that you are establishing those deep bonds with people that can and will lift up our needs. And one of the things that I think the NAACP and JOLT have really identified early on was that a lot of our work is overlapping due to the fact that we're facing the same challenges. We're up against the same oppressor in some instances, right? And so when we are able to identify that our power is only duplicated and multiplied when we come together, we have a greater chance at success at moving forward all of our ambitious goals, and how we can continue to illustrate that powerful vision of what is truly possible coming from brown and Black minds and bodies. And so mission alignment is crucial. These are just 3 questions for you to kind of pose yourself as you're beginning to identify those partnerships and then moving forward with the next step.
So the next step is exploring synergy. And so this is really what I guess in modern terms would be like, what is the vibe? Is this going to be a good partnership, a good relationship? Do you guys match each other's energy? So our first point is establishing rapport and setting up an introductory meeting. So Antonio and I met with 2 of our national staff. So we met with Wisdom and Derek as well, and we had an introductory call. And I will say the first time that we got on the call, Antonio was like super bubbly and he had a really big personality. As you can see, he's very friendly. And so that started our meeting off really well. and it was able to bring a really positive light into our partnership. So anytime that we get on a call, we always talk about like how we're doing, what did you do today, what do you have planned for the week, the weekend, and it's personable. So it's not just about the partnership that we have, but it's also, are you okay as a person in order to even have this partnership, in order to even move forward and make sure that we are going to have a good call. We're going to be able to execute this plan. So in the same thing in terms of connecting with people and connecting with key people. So on that call, we were able to identify that for Antonio, he wanted to make sure we were able to loop in all of the communications representatives for Jolt, and anyone that was involved in media, and field organizing. And the same thing for us. We were saying, well, we're working on voter rights and voter accessibility. So I want to make sure that my political action chair is in the loop and that we set up meetings, and then also that we have our national staff in the loop as well, as they help with field organizing as well. So we wanted to make sure that everyone that needed to be involved in the team was also involved in the conversation. And then being able to identify transformative projects. So that was something that we were able to pinpoint beforehand and say, we are connecting and we want to have this conversation because we're both interested in voter rights. We both work on a lot of voter registration, we work on voter education, and we want to bring that to the next level. So we'll talk a little bit more about what our partnership looks like and why, and what we're doing. But for us, our biggest thing was about voting rights and voter accessibility, and being able to pinpoint that and express that to one another and say, this is what I intend for it to be about. This is what I intend for the outcome to be. How do we work on these steps together? Which leads to the fourth point, which is identifying action items and being able to say, well, are we going to write a statement? Are we going to produce articles? Are we going to keep building within other organizations to compose a coalition? And what that looks like in terms of developing systems. What systems do we want to break down? What systems do we want to get involved in? And what other key players need to add to that? So in establishing action items, you bring in a lot of the other 3 points, and what our communication looks like. So a lot of times we will communicate via email and then we'll set up a call, and that works really well for us. But for some people, maybe it's a little bit more informal. Maybe you use text messaging, or maybe everything is a meeting similar to Zoom or Google Hangouts, or maybe it's just a phone call. And maybe in a post-COVID situation where we're able to meet in person and sit down, it definitely would be that as well. But these are some of our first steps in terms of how we explore whether or not this is even going to be a good partnership. It's not just about the mission alignment. The mission alignment is the first step, but the second is also making sure that, one, you have something that you can work on, can be beneficial for both organizations, but two, that the people that are working together are also going to have a really good working relationship.
Absolutely. And that introductory meeting that you have with your future coalition partner is crucial. You want to make sure that you start that meeting off on the right foot and really be vulnerable and share what your needs are, share what you want to take away from this meeting and this relationship, right? And explore those overlapping areas of work, right? And I was really pleasantly surprised to know that the NAACP was already, aggressively working towards making sure that Texas has voter eligibility and identifies voter suppression tactics and identifies how to tackle them, and mobilizing around, vote by mail or online voter registration. And so those are all components that Jolt is also prioritizing and exploring how we can continue to lift each other's up, right? Lift each other's work up. And then explore how we can continue to move that needle on those key topics, right? And so for you, it may look different on your campus, and it may be a different subject matter, but ultimately what you want to identify is how you can be of service to each other and in what way you can help amplify each other's message. And then connecting key people is crucial, right? So we all have individuals tasked with different responsibilities, and we want to make sure that those people are in the loop. A solid relationship will only be beneficial mutually if we have a clear path for communication and everybody's understanding of how we're moving this forward, how we're advancing the goal. Identifying transformative projects, I think, is a great exercise that needs to be conducted. And maybe, for us, we had a great immediate call to action, what we could do, and an immediate takeaway. But it may take a couple of meetings to identify what are the best possibilities for you and explore different scenarios to identify what are the most transformative projects you can do on your campus or in your community. And it doesn't have to be grand scale. You can tackle something a little bit more local or more niche, smaller. But I think ultimately, break by break, we can build this solid foundation for communities of color to thrive on, particularly in Texas. Texas is now a majority community, Black and brown. When you think of Texas, folks like to think about a conservative state, or they want to think about a boots and cowboys, and that's just not the reality that we're living in anymore. The reality is that Texas is increasingly browner and Blacker than ever before. And within the next couple of years, you can only expect that demographic shift to increase. And it's imperative that in this moment of transformative change for our demographics, that voices of young brown and Black people are front and center, and identifying how you can be part of that transformation that our state is undergoing is crucial. Developing the systems that need to be put in place are also great. You have to have follow-up and follow through. That's going to be the deciding factor whether your partnership or coalition will be ultimately successful. You can't just leave it on the notebook and in your notes. You have to make sure that you follow through and walk the walk, right? And so that means beginning to amplify folks, beginning to strategize in how to come together and what the next action step will be for your partnership.
Okay, so the third step is probably, once you've established that you all want to work together, the third step is probably the most important step, leveraging each other's existing networks. So we've talked a little bit about social media, and so you want to create that digital and social media presence. So even with this training, we made sure, okay, NAACP posted it, Jolt posted it, we both tagged each other. We were able to explore and see, okay, well, someone on the Jolt side of things, if they're seeing this from their Instagram, for instance, and they see it on the story, they can now go and tap Texas NAACP or NAACPYC and go see what that organization is about. And the same thing for NAACP. And so you're able to expand who your audience is. And I think that's part of it as well. So as much as it's important that Antonio and I connect between Texas NAACP and Jolt, it's also important that those who are our members, who are in our chapters, also are connecting and also are seeing this as a partnership. Because if Antonio and I are having a partnership with each other, that's great. But if it's not trickling down to everyone else, it's not going to make a difference. And so it brings to the second point about joint chapter meetings. So something we've talked about is post-COVID-19, being able to have the Texas units and the Jolt units to come together and have a meeting so that we can talk a little bit more about what they hope to see, what partnerships look like for them, how they can increase that on their campus, because they may already be on their campus and in their community serving a similar demographic, or serving those demographics separately, and how you can bring those together. And so it brings it also to coalition building. So we always talk about how we're better with numbers. We will make a better impact if we are a larger group. And that's a lot of what this is about. So we're already combining Black and brown communities, trying to amplify that voice. But how do we continue to do that? Because Joel and NAACP can't do that alone. So how do we extend that to other organizations, whether organizations that NAACP is already in partnership with, or organizations that Jolt's already in partnership with, or just one that neither of us have been in communication with, but we're able to reach out to them and say, hey, this is what we're working on. We want to work on voter rights, voter education, voter accessibility. And we want to bring you all to the table because we know that this is an issue that is beyond just our membership, but it is statewide. It can even be nationwide. And we want to make sure that everyone is included in that conversation, so that we can make sure that, as we said in the previous slide, we're engaging in these systems and we're able to break them down and rebuild them in a way that is actually impactful for our people, that's actually beneficial for people that look like us.
Absolutely. And, Siobhan and I were just talking a little bit before we went on today about the power of digital media and social media, and how, this generation has an opportunity to really catapult our generation into a completely different realm that our ancestors could have only ever dreamed of, right? And like, we owe so much to the people that came before us and that really sacrificed it all and risked their lives many times to give us the privileges that we now have. And so in this moment of COVID, while we're at home, I want you to really think about that and think about how the responsibility to move the needle, to push our movements forward really depend on us and depends on our creativity, depends on our leadership, depends on our voice. And, we've seen movements in this generation already begin to transform the way we talk about different major topics, whether it's criminal justice reform or immigration, et cetera. There's been hashtags that have trended, that have transformed the way people look at communities, the way that people talk about and address the issues at hand. It's been able to catapult and capture the attention of the national media and the global media. And so we really have an opportunity as a digital generation to begin to architect and create and construct a new future for ourselves. And it's imperative that in this moment, we combine forces with organizations such as the NAACP or other major organizations in this country that have historically led the way. And it's imperative that we continue to honor those traditions of bold and fearless leadership that provide a platform for young people, for people of color to really navigate and take control of the narrative. At Jolt, we often tell our community that the reason we are under attack is because we're so powerful. We're the biggest threat to the status quo. And when we start to recognize that, we will really be unstoppable. What we're all about is making sure that our community starts to make a mental change from minority to majority. We've grown up being called minorities all of our lives. Minority, minority, minority is what they try to make us believe we are. But the reality is that with our demographic change in this country, we will soon be the majority. And with that comes a lot of political power. They can no longer deny our strength. And when we come together, they can no longer deny our ability to create and spark change. And so I really hope that after this webinar and this presentation, you do a deep dive into your own capacity, your own ability to create change, and stop looking to the left and stop looking to the right for the next leader and step up and fill that void. You have the opportunity and the capacity within yourself to create transformative change in this state and in this country. You don't have to be an elected official to bring about change. We hold the keys to the future. And now this generation is the largest eligible voting bloc in the nation. Millennials have outnumbered baby boomers. It's our time to really hit the ground running and make sure that we set the agenda for what the next 5, 10 years are going to look like and how we begin to really take ownership about the future we want to leave behind for our children.
Yeah, and I love what you said, Antonio, about the history in the past. And you started talking about it at the end in terms of thinking about the present and the future. So it's great to remember all that our ancestors have done for us to get us to where we are now. But don't just leave that in history, create some new history. So like Antonio said, be the leader in your community, in your state, in the nation, where you're making things happen on your own. And so I'll share like a little anecdote, but I literally never thought like I would be in this, I will say, on this webinar in this position or anything like that. Even when I came to Baylor as a freshman, I really didn't know much about NAACP outside of just what you hear on the news, what you hear about in history, what you see very sparsely in your history books. But that's pretty much all that I knew. And I joined NAACP just to find a sense of community at my school. We didn't have very many students of color or students of color organizations. And that's how I got involved. But once I got involved, I realized, oh, this is what I've been doing. This is what I've been interested in, but I just wasn't in the organization to know that there were other people that were doing the same thing. And even when I became president of Baylor NAACP, it wasn't necessarily because, I won't say because I didn't want to. I definitely wanted to. I became president at the end of my sophomore year, and I thought it was something that was more of a senior year initiative. But it was my time. It was my time to run, and I was able to fulfill 2 terms. And then even when it became an officer for the state of Texas, it wasn't something that I envisioned. It was something I actually had no clue existed. And once I did find out about it, I joined a committee, and then I became an officer. And so here I am now on this webinar with you all as president. And so you may not think that you are a leader, but there are other people who are always looking up to you. You're leading someone, and if not, you're always leading yourself. But it doesn't mean that you can't be an influencer. It doesn't mean you can't go beyond just yourself. And so, like Antonio said, step up. It may be frightening. It may be nerve wracking. You may have a whirlwind of emotions. I know I currently have quite a few, but I think it's okay to have those emotions. But you just have to take that leap. And there's one thing that my mom always told me was the worst thing someone can do is tell you no. Or actually, yeah, the worst thing someone can do is tell you no, but the worst thing that you can do is not try again or not try something different. So it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to not have all the answers, but it's not okay to just sit in your house and be, or sit in your house and not do anything when you know that you can be doing so much more. So that's really what also building partnerships is about. It's about just taking a leap.
Yeah. And speaking to Siobhan's point about fear and like not being paralyzed by it or intimidated by it, I think it's crucial to recognize that in this moment, particularly in the state of Texas, there's so much it's such a toxic political climate, right? That it could be intimidating or even fearful to really speak out and address the issues and concerns that our communities are facing. But when I think about that, I think about our ancestors, and I think about how Dr. King must have felt fear at some point. Harriet Tubman must have felt fear at some point. How fear has always been a tool used to try to control and minimize us. And we can't allow ourselves to be paralyzed by fear. We need to make sure that we maximize every opportunity that we have, and step up and really speak out on behalf of our people, because there's so much at stake. Even this year alone, with the census happening, with one of the most consequential presidential elections at our doorstep, there's so much at stake. But it's also happening at a moment where our community's power is growing. We're on the cusp of greatness like never before. And so it's imperative that we have that bold and fearless leadership really reflected among our youth, among our upcoming leaders that are ready to take the reins and really recognize the potential that they themselves hold. I am so privileged and honored to be, even sharing this training session with Siobhan, and I'm so happy that so many decades after the work of our ancestors, we're continuing to push forward, and the trail that they blaze, and continue to break down the barriers that seek to limit our futures. I think that in the grand scheme of things, history is being made every single day in this country, and it's imperative that we continue to contribute to it in a positive way, and in a way that we can continue to amplify the road for others to come through. And I'm so happy to be able to be a part of that with you all.
Before we go into Q&A, so we wanted to share a little bit about what our Jolt and Texas NAACP partnership looks like, so you guys do have an idea of what we want to accomplish and how we're trying to do that. So Antonio, feel free to jump in whenever, but what we are looking to do is work on voter rights and voter accessibility. And so that is what we identified to be what we're trying to transform. And so our ideas are an increase in voter registration across Texas, but also for it to be more accessible via online registration. And so in the wake of COVID-19, we're realizing, like for instance, I'm a registered deputy registrar, so I can register people to vote, but I can't do that in a social distancing capacity. So there are options to go and print off a voter registration card and mail it in, but you also have to pay for that postage. So there's a lot of barriers for low income people, for just anyone who is really following the rules of social distancing to be able to register to vote. So you have a lot of first time voters, or if you've changed your address, or if you're just a new voter who are unable to register, and we want to be able to break that down. But it's something that has been necessary just even before COVID-19. There are a lot of states that do have online registration, and it is very helpful. There's also the option for mail-in ballots, and so that's something that has not been extended across all of Texas, at least in not a no excuse capacity. And so we want to be able to have everyone to have access. So it's one thing if you're registered to vote, but it's another if you're registered to vote, yet you still can't vote, or you can't vote without risking your life, and you don't want to expose yourself to a virus, or just in general, even if COVID-19 had not happened, you are just not able to vote because you're at work or you're in school. You just don't have the option. And so we want to modernize what that looks like, what voting looks like. It's absolutely crazy that we're in 2020, and we have all this technology, yet we kind of use it when it's feasible, or in this case, when it's feasible for some, but not for everyone. And so we want to extend it beyond just how do you register in person, how do you vote in person, but we want to make sure that everyone has the right to do so. I know we've also talked about same day voting and automatic registration. And so that was something Antonio brought to our conversation. And I love the idea of why is it that it's part of your citizenship to be able to vote. That is something that you have the right to do. But once you reach eligibility, you're not able to automatically register. So, or you're not automatically registered. And so we've thought about the idea of pushing for automatic registration. Once you turn 18, you should already be registered to vote. Why do I have to then go voice my opinion and say, oh, I actually do want to register to vote? I should already have that right because I do. And so that's a lot of what we're trying to come up with. It's online voter registration, it's automatic registration, it's mail-in ballots, and how do we make sure that people are able to vote, and express their opinion for what they want their elections, their government officials to look like, if they're not able to express that vote.
Yeah. So, you know, at Jolt, we recognize these challenges as a modern voter suppression, right? So when you have a plurality, a majority of the electorate being young, this new digital generation, not being able to access voter registration online, essentially is an extension of voter suppression, because those who are in power recognize that if they make it feasible, if they make it as easy as possible for young people to vote by maybe going online and registering there, that they're more than likely going to lose power. And so what we see here is a demographic shift that's happening while simultaneously there's a generational discrimination that is occurring. And so in order for us to have a really truly representative democracy, for us to be truly represented statewide and nationwide, we need online voter registration. And Siobhan is absolutely right. I think that the next step is also to uphold the constitutional right of every American citizen to vote. And that means automatic voter registration. You turn 18 and you're automatically registered to vote. I think that we do our democracy a disservice when we have to put into place so many hoops for our communities to jump through to get the right to vote. But we also have to remember that our democracy is a system that was founded originally that only permitted white land owning men to vote, right? So it was from its inception a system that excluded us on purpose. It's a systematic attempt at trying to dilute the power of communities of color. And so we need to make sure that we have that top of mind as we begin to reconstruct what these systems look like in order to make sure that they benefit everyone in this nation, regardless of religion, sex, creed, orientation, etc. We need to make sure that if America wants to be the leading democracy in the world and wants to remain as a beacon of hope for the world, we need to make sure that we amplify the opportunity for everyone to have their voice heard in this country. And in order for us to create a truly representative democracy, we need to make sure that we get involved. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here. I know that folks that are on this are probably really passionate about the upcoming election and our democracy at large, but it's reaching out to those folks that we know that are in our contacts, that are not as tuned in, that are not as engaged, and making them realize that there is so much at stake and that we have a true opportunity to make sure that we win the representation and resources that our communities truly deserve. And so through partnerships like the NAACP and JOLTS coalition, we are able to bring about and amplify that topic to a broader audience. And we hope that you all continue to engage. Like Siobhan said, JOLT and the NAACP share campuses often, and we would love for collaboration to happen amongst our own student chapters as well on campuses, and look towards the future to explore a more intentional way of overlapping our work that just benefits all of us. And so, yeah, I'm excited about the prospects that we're laying out and the way that we're looking at modernizing civic engagement for an entirely new generation.
So now we're going to take questions. I'm going to answer some of the questions that we already have. So feel free to type them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Either one is completely fine. The first question is asking if the training on the 21st will be a repeat of this one or next one. So they'll all be completely different. So this one will be on community building. I personally do not know what the 21st training will be on, but it will be a different topic. The next question talked about how or when we have successfully completed our goal, how can we maintain relations with the organizations from our coalition? And so I will say this looks different. And I can speak to this from a college chapter perspective and as well as our state conference relationship as well. So when it comes to JOLT and Texas NAACP, I think we've done a really good job of maintaining that relationship by staying in constant communication. So we made sure that we have action items that we can follow up on. I think where things decide to go on a downward spiral is when you don't have anything that you feel like you're working on or that you feel like is pushing forward. So for us, we know that what we're working on, we've just told y'all, we want to work on voter registration and education and mail-in ballots. And so we have other events that we have planned. So like we're going to do an Instagram live event so that we can discuss those issues as well as ideate some more and get some community feedback. And just tell a little bit more about what we want to do. And so that is one way to do that. So I think it's the communication is the first barrier. And once you're staying in communication, you have something to work on, you always will have something else. So once you finish one project, you can say, okay, we met a benchmark. What's our next step? So I think it's all about the plan that you form. So it's one thing to have a goal. I can say, I want to be a CEO of a company, but if I don't have a plan to get there, then it may not go as far as I think it will. So I think that's really the first step. But I'll let Antonio talk a little bit more if he wants to say something. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the college chapter or maybe unit perspective, because I may have some insight on organizations from that aspect as well.
So and I think, I think Siobhan hit the nail on the head. I think that the partnership that you forge shouldn't have a deadline. Like you shouldn't end it. I think that you want to explore partnerships that will continue to be thought partners throughout the process, that will continue to support you throughout the process. And the NAACP is not going anywhere, and JOLT is not going anywhere. We have ambitious goals that are multi-year goals. These fights, modernizing civic engagement, making sure that we propose and push forward online voter registration. These are fights that are going to be, we're in for the long haul. It's going to take a while, and so we recognize that. And so making sure that you are setting, of course, immediate goals that can be achievable in a shorter timeline, but also being ambitious about what you really want to accomplish, and dreaming as big as you possibly can about what a democracy in this country should look like, and establishing those relationships that will run a long span, that you want to continue to come back to and feed off of each other for a while. I think that it's imperative that we not only utilize or leverage our partnerships to expedite like our political agenda, but also to really be partners in this movement and to say, hey, what's working for you? What's, this is what we're trying out. How is that working for you? I think that when we do that, we can get some great lessons learned from proven success track records that can then you can leverage to maximize your outputs as well. So I think that being really strategic about how you navigate the relationship is important, but also trying to hone in on the fact that you want to set a foundation that will have a lasting relationship for many years.
Yeah, and I'll say from the unit perspective, specifically college chapter, though it can be applied to any of the other units as well, is you may already have organizations on your campus that you can leverage their support from. So I know for me, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So shout out to any Deltas on the call. But there's a lot of Greek life on college campuses, and there already is a partnership between NAACP and NPHC where you can leverage that already. You can say, hey, what is it that you all have going on? How can we better engage your membership? How do we get them to participate? So I think it also is meeting people where they are. So not every organization will be a complete mission alignment. So for instance, on my campus, we've partnered with our Black Student Union before. And so when you think about it, NAACP is more of a civil rights, social justice organization, and they're more of a social organization. So how do you bring both of those two organizations together? Well, what we tried to do was say, okay, well, we're going to have a meeting about the concerns of the students on our campus. And so that can be a little bit more political action oriented, whether it's about our administration and the policies that they have for, or it could be something that's more social about the state of the Black students at Baylor University. So I think in that sense, it just depends on what your coalition is for and what those organizations' intentions are. So you can go out and find, you can have different coalitions. So maybe something is more socially inclined, maybe something is more civic engagement, something is aligned more towards criminal justice, but it just depends on what that relationship looks like. But it goes back to the communication side of things. And it also depends on what you want that to be. So if you want it to be a one-time partnership, there's many of organizations where we've said, oh, we just want to partner for this event. We just want to bring these two communities together for this specific event. And that's okay too. But if you want them to be long lasting, I think really do have to sit down and make sure that your goals actually have actions to them so they can actually have outcomes and so that you can continue that cycle and it'll actually be proven to be a good partnership. So we have a couple other questions. So another question was NAACP has strict guidelines when it comes to taking action. How can we collab with other organizations to take action when our forms of action might not align with theirs? So I think with that, you have to do what makes both organizations, if I'm understanding this question correctly, and if I'm not, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I think you have to find a way for those to be this mutual, I guess. So if someone really wants to go out and protest and you and your chapter, your unit doesn't want to do that, how can you come to a common ground and say, well, can we put out a statement or can we do a virtual campaign? Can we find a different way to meet the same goal where we're both comfortable with that? I think with a partnership, and this is just like in life in general, but you have to be okay with what is happening. Like you can't have one, a partnership is between two or more. And so if someone is not happy or someone is not interested in what's happening, then that's not really a partnership. So you want to make sure that everyone is consenting to that entity or whatever action that you guys are taking. So if it doesn't align, you have to find a way for it to, or you have to come to a compromise, or you have to create a different option. Let's see. Another question is, in our prospective communities, how do we inspire unenthusiastic or unconcerned young and first-time potential voters to participate in the November general election? I think that is a great question. It's not an easy question to answer. I think you have to, like I said earlier, you have to meet people where they are. So I'll say, if you're on, sorry, the only example I can think of are college campuses. This is my best experience. But if you're on a college campus and you know that everyone like loves to party, well, then maybe that is their entry into the party. Maybe that's how they get a discount. Show me your voter registration card, and that's how you're going to get into this party. So I think it's about figuring out what is of interest to people, what is going to make them move. If you tell someone, oh, we're just voting to make sure that our country is a better place, that may not be the best information for them. But if you say, okay, we're voting to make sure that schools are being given more money to be able to support students, and this is how the trickle down effect will end up, and this is how money will end up in your pocket, that might actually make them a little bit more excited to vote. So I think you have to find the things that are important to them and that they're passionate about, so that they will understand that voting is not just for the president of the United States. It's not just for your senators, your Congress people, but it's for a more holistic society. And you have to find the thing that will get them to go out so that when they do vote and they say, okay, well, that was important to me. I saw the results. Okay, this person is working in this position for me. They'll understand you have to continue to vote as well. So that's what I would say from a young person perspective. What I've told people is just finding the thing that you're passionate about. And once you're passionate about it, you can then pass it on to someone else, to another young person and say, hey, did you vote? They're like, oh no, I didn't vote. Well, why didn't you? Well, what do you care about? Well, did you know this is affected by this? So I think that is the key.
And I'll just add, at Jolt, the model that we use that has been really successful for us is art. We've recognized that throughout history, movements that have incorporated art, where people are illustrated in ways that are powerful, you have a greater participation rate. So, it's often the case that, for example, I'm just speaking directly from Jolt, Latinos are seldomly able to see themselves reflected in the governor's mansion or in the mayor's office. And so because we don't see ourselves in those positions of power, it's more challenging for us to really believe we can even strive to that, right? And so we hire artists and residents. We have a fellowship of artists that is like Texas based, and they begin to illustrate artistic renditions of what the powerful future looks like for communities of color in this state. And we really believe that through art, when you allow people to see themselves reflected and they begin to believe in their own power, you begin to change the way that they perceive the future and the way they perceive themselves. And so, and one of the great ways that I would recommend is start tapping into the art aspect of community engagement and communicating with folks in a way that makes them feel connected, makes them feel represented. All of our illustrations at Jolt, whether it be our GOTV or VR campaigns, they all have brown and black bodies front and center. We have illustrations that depict the voices and the communities that we represent. A lot of the times, people discover Jolt through our social media pages, or particularly like our Instagram, and they'll say, I saw the art and I was just so moved by the way that you showcase our community in such a powerful way. And I think that has played a pivotal role in like young people really getting involved. And it's because we are following the blueprint of movements throughout our history and generations of artists that have made music and made paintings in some of our darkest times to really bring about unity and illustrate the possibility of change.
Okay, I know we have a question. Jasmine, do you want to ask your question?
I do. Thank you, guys. This is I think my second webinar, so I'm pretty new to this. So thank you for being patient with me, and it's been some very great information and very motivating. So thanks for that, guys. So a question for you guys: as another commonly socially disadvantaged group, are NAACP partnerships with those serving those affected by developmental disabilities, are those common at this time?
Jasmine, I do not know if I have an accurate answer for you. But I do know we have a lot of national partnerships. But I think even if it's not, there isn't anything that says it can't be. So I think if it's something that your unit is looking to engage in, you want to talk a little bit more about developmental disabilities and how that is affecting the community that you're serving, or just any community, I think that's something that you should go forth and try to create a partnership for, so you can bring more awareness to it, so we can talk about it more. So if there isn't, in your opinion, if there isn't enough partnerships that are discussing developmental disabilities, this can be your time to say, hey, that's where I'm going to go out and seek, and I'm going to make this something that needs to be normalized, so that other communities and other units, other chapters, other branches should be doing this as well, so that we can create that change in that area as well. So I don't have an answer for you as of, yes, we have X amount of partnerships with developmental disabilities, But I can say that if you don't think that there's enough, that you should definitely try to do that.
That sounds good. Thanks. Thank you for that.
No problem. Thank you. Oh, this is a Jolt question, Antonio. So it says, Jolt, do you have any Michigan chapters, or what other organizations do you have partnerships with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, at Jolt, we like to believe that Texas is the center of the universe. So right now, we're a really young organization. We've only been around since 2016, and we are so fortunate to have grown exponentially in a short period of time. But we are Texas-based and Texas-focused because we believe that with 38 electoral votes and 36 congressional seats, if you transform Texas, you transform America. And so we're fighting hard to do that in this state. And in the state, we are fortunate to count with a lot of really powerful partnerships. We often work with TOP. We often work with Battleground Texas. We often work with Move Texas, the Texas Rising, Youth Rise Texas, and of course the NAACP. And for right now, Jolt, like I mentioned, is Texas-based, Texas-focused. But in the future, we look forward to launching our first nationwide campaign, which will be an exciting initiative that we look forward to rolling out in the spring of next year. But thank you so much for your question.
Do we have any other questions? Again, you can feel free to put them in the chat box. They can be about Jolt, about NAACP, about partnerships. I don't know if Antonio is okay with it. It can be questions about him or I, our involvement, anything before we close out. Great. Well, we thank you all for joining us tonight. This was a really great experience. We hope that you gathered a lot from it. And you can feel free to reference this. I know it was streamed on YouTube. And so that's where you can reference the presentation as well as anything else. Our Instagram handles for both Jolt, Texas NAACP, myself, and Antonio are at the bottom of the presentation. So feel free to reach out to us if you need anything, if you have any more questions, if you're looking to get involved in what we're working on, or just want to learn more. And again, we thank you so much for tuning in today. I know it's a Friday night, and we just hope that you enjoy the rest of your night.
Bye, everyone.